Honey, use mom's card. She's got like $90,000 saved up. I heard my son Edward's voice from the living room, and it felt like the floor was opening up under my feet. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch. My hands covered in flour when those words cut through the wall and hit me in the chest like a closed fist. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. My own son, the child I carried for 9 months, the one I nursed and raised alone after his father left us, was handing my bank card over to Grace, his wife, as if it were his. My name's Elaine Morris, 63 years old, retired school administrator, widow of 35 years to a man who worked hard, saved harder, and left behind enough for me to live comfortably. Not rich, not lavish, just secure. I'd always been careful with money. Maybe that's why it cut so deep when my own son treated it like a toy. It started about a month before that awful day. My son Ethan and his wife Melissa had been struggling, or at least that's what they said. Ethan lost his job at a logistics firm after a merger, and Melissa, well, she never quite kept one. They came over one evening, sitting on my couch, looking like kids rehearsing bad news. Mom, Ethan began, rubbing his hands together, we're a little behind on the mortgage. Just until my next interview pans out. We'll pay you back. I'd helped them before, paid off their car loan, covered their wedding bills when Melissa's parents forgot to chip in. Each time I told myself, it's family. That's what we do. So I nodded, wrote a check for $3,000, and told them it was a gift. Melissa smiled, that tight, polite smile she reserved for people she didn't respect. You're a saint, Elaine. Really? I ignored the way she looked around my living room, her eyes landing on my framed photos, my modest pearl necklace, the things I'd kept from my husband, Thomas. That woman had always had a way of making me feel like I was being audited. 2 weeks later, Ethan dropped by again. He said he needed to borrow my debit card to pay a small bill, something about an overdue water payment that could only be handled online. Just for today, Mom. I'll bring it back tomorrow, promise. I hesitated. But he was my son. My only child. I handed it over. The next morning, he texted, all sorted. Thanks again, Mom. Love you. Except he didn't bring the card back. And I didn't notice right away because I rarely used it myself, most of my bills were automated, and I preferred paying in cash. But when I checked my drawer a week later, the card was gone. I called him. Ethan, where's my debit card? Oh. Sorry, Mom, he said, his voice airy. I left it in the glove compartment. Melissa had it. We'll drop it off soon. He didn't. And I, like a fool, let it slide. The betrayal came to light by accident. I was visiting my sister Carol in town when she asked if I'd seen the new mall that had opened. It's wild, Elaine. The kind of place Melissa would die for. Designer everything. We laughed about that, until later that evening, when I got a notification on my phone. A bank alert. Suspicious activity detected. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But when I opened the app, my hands went cold. There it was, $82,347. 19 charged at Westbrook Galleria, one of the most expensive malls in the state. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I blinked at the screen, hoping it was some technical glitch. Then I saw the note attached to the purchase, authorization, chip and PIN entry. My PIN. My card. Someone had used it in person. I called Ethan, my heart pounding. No answer. Tried again. Nothing. Then I called Melissa. She picked up, cheerful. Hey, Elaine. What's up? Melissa, I said carefully, did you go shopping today? There was a pause. A faint rustle. Then, just some errands. Why? Because someone just spent $82,000 on my account. Dead silence. Then she laughed, actually laughed. Oh, that? Ethan said it was fine. He told me to use your card for the wedding registry stuff. You've got savings, right? That's when the world tilted. My own son had told his wife to use my card. Without permission. As if I were an open wallet. I hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove straight to the bank. The manager, Mr. Klein, knew me well. He looked pale as he printed the statement. Mrs. Morris, these transactions were all approved in person with your card. I stared at the pages. Gucci. Apple Store. A luxury spa. Imported perfume. Designer shoes. And one charge that broke me, a diamond bracelet from Villeroy Jewelers, $12,000. Melissa had always wanted one. I asked him to freeze the account immediately. He nodded. Of course. But, Mrs. Morris, it seems they tried to make another purchase right after, at the same mall. The card was declined. That image stuck in my head, Melissa at the counter, surrounded by shopping bags, smiling until the cashier said those magic words, "Sorry, but this card is declined." I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt grief. Because what kind of son would do that to his mother? That night, Ethan finally called. "Mom, you embarrassed us today," he snapped. "They froze the account while we were paying for our stuff. You should have told me there was a limit." I was speechless. "Ethan, you stole from me. It's not stealing if you're family. You weren't even using it. We'll pay you back." "How?" I asked. "You don't have a job, Ethan. And Melissa hasn't worked in years." He hesitated. "We're getting back on our feet. You've got plenty. Dad would have wanted you to help us." "Don't you dare use your father to justify this," I said quietly. My voice was shaking now, not from fear, but fury. There was a pause. Then a click. He hung up. I sat there alone in my kitchen, the same place where I'd once fed that boy mashed carrots and helped him with algebra homework. The same table where he'd cried the day his father died, and I'd promised to always be there for him. Now, I realized, I'd raised someone who saw kindness as weakness. I looked at the bank statement one more time, the long list of theft disguised as shopping, and something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to plan. Because if my son thought he could rob me blind and walk away smiling, he was about to learn the difference between generosity and foolishness. And this time I wouldn't warn him before pulling the rug out. The morning after I froze the account, I woke up with a strange calm. The kind that comes when anger settles into something sharper, colder, and far more dangerous. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the photo of my late husband, Thomas, smiling in his uniform. "You wouldn't have let him get away with this," I whispered. Thomas had always said, "Elaine, when someone shows you who they are, believe them." Well, my son had shown me exactly who he was, a grown man who thought his mother was a piggy bank with a heartbeat. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I was going to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. First, I went back to the bank and spoke to Mr. Klein. I explained that my son and his wife had used my card without permission. He nodded gravely and said, "We'll help you file a claim, Mrs. Morris. But since they're family, this might get complicated." "Don't worry about complicated," I told him. "Just make sure every cent they took is documented." He printed everything, pages of transactions, from jewelry to electronics to a stay at a 5-star resort they'd apparently booked for the weekend. My hands shook a little when I saw the totals, but underneath that tremor was resolve. Then I went home and called my lawyer, an old friend named Ruth Jacobs. She was a retired family attorney who'd helped me settle Thomas's estate years ago. Ruth answered on the second ring. "Elaine? It's been ages. What's going on?" "I need advice," I said. "And possibly a will update." There was a pause. "Oh boy," she said. "What did Ethan do now?" By that evening, Ruth was sitting in my kitchen, sipping chamomile tea while I showed her the bank records. She read them in silence, occasionally shaking her head. $82,000, she muttered. That's not a mistake. That's theft. I know, I said softly. But I don't want him arrested. I want him to understand what it feels like to lose something you thought was yours. Her eyes lit up. You're thinking of teaching him a financial lesson. I'm thinking of taking back control, I replied. Ruth smiled, that lawyer's smile that meant someone was about to regret underestimating her. All right, she said. Tell me what you have in mind. That night, I stayed up late going through my documents, savings accounts, property titles, investments. Over the years, Thomas and I had built a careful web of safety nets, a savings account here, a certificate of deposit there, a modest investment portfolio in mutual funds. Ethan thought my card with $130,000 was all I had. He had no idea about the rest. I logged into my online banking and started making changes. I transferred the bulk of my savings into a new account under my maiden name, Elaine Carter, something no one in my family even remembered. Then I moved smaller amounts into separate savings accounts under new numbers. By midnight, the account Ethan thought was Mom's money had less than $1,000 in it. The next step was psychological. Ethan and Melissa needed to believe I was helpless, that I'd forgiven them, that I'd gone back to being the same soft mother they could manipulate. So I called him. Ethan, I said, keeping my voice even, I've been thinking. You're right. I overreacted. Maybe I should have been clearer about helping you. There was silence on the line, then a cautious, so, we're okay? Yes, I said, forcing a small laugh. But I want to sit down with you and Melissa this weekend. We'll talk about how I can support you properly. No misunderstandings. He sounded relieved, maybe even smug. Sure, Mom. We can come by Sunday. Melissa's been stressed. She felt like you were mad. I'm not mad, I lied. I just want to make things right. When I hung up, I felt Thomas's photo watching me from the mantel. Don't give me that look, I told him. This is just strategy. Sunday arrived bright and deceptively peaceful. I set the table with my good china, the set I hadn't used since Thomas's last birthday, and cooked Ethan's favorite meal, pot roast with garlic potatoes. When they arrived, Melissa looked radiant in a way that made my stomach turn. Her nails were manicured, her purse brand new. The diamond bracelet from the statement glimmered on her wrist. Wow, Elaine, this looks amazing, she said, kissing the air near my cheek. Just a family dinner, I said, smiling tightly. Ethan sat down like he owned the place. Glad we're all past the awkwardness, he said, reaching for the bread. Of course, I replied sweetly. But before we eat, there's something I'd like to discuss. They both looked up, wary. I've decided to change how I handle my finances, I began. I realized I'm getting older, and I can't manage everything alone. So I'm setting up power of attorney for my estate. Ethan frowned. You mean like, someone controls your accounts? Exactly, I said. And I've already chosen someone I trust completely. Melissa smiled. That's wonderful. You know, Ethan could. It's not Ethan, I interrupted gently. It's Ruth. Their smiles froze. She'll be overseeing everything from now on, I continued. Including access to my funds. She'll make sure no one, and I do mean no one, uses my card again without my permission. Ethan's jaw tightened. Mom, come on, you don't need. I do, I said calmly. And I've already filed it with the bank. For a moment, silence hung over the table like fog. Then Melissa laughed awkwardly. Well, that's good for you, Elaine. You deserve to feel safe. Oh, I do, I said, smiling. Especially now that I've also adjusted my will. Their heads snapped up. What do you mean adjusted? Ethan asked. I took you out, I said simply. Until further notice. The color drained from his face. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious, I said, my voice steady. You and your wife stole $82,000 from me. I can't undo that. But I can make sure you never see another dime from me again, unless you learn to earn it honestly. Melissa's fork clattered against her plate. This is insane. You can't just. I can, I said. And I did. Ethan stood up, his face red. Unbelievable. After everything we've done for you. I laughed. Actually laughed. What you've done for me? Ethan, the only thing you've done is remind me why Thomas always handled the money. They left soon after, slamming the door so hard the chandelier rattled. I sat there alone, staring at the half-eaten pot roast, feeling both empty and alive. The revenge wasn't over, not even close. They thought they could ignore me, that this was just a tantrum from an old woman. But I had plans. Big ones. Because if they wanted to play with my money, they were about to find out what happens when the bank bites back. I didn't hear from Ethan or Melissa for nearly 3 weeks after that dinner. At first, the silence felt like peace. The house was calm, my mornings were my own again, and I could finally breathe without expecting another phone call asking for just a little help. But by the second week, I started to suspect the silence wasn't surrender. It was plotting. They weren't the kind to give up easily, especially Melissa. That woman treated manipulation like a sport. One evening, as I was watering my garden, my neighbor, Lydia, called over the fence. Elaine, I saw your son's car here yesterday morning. Did you two make up? My stomach tightened. Yesterday? I wasn't even home. Lydia nodded. Well, I saw him on your porch. Looked like he was fiddling with something near the door handle. I froze. My spare house key was hidden in a ceramic frog planter beside the porch steps. I'd kept it there for years, old habit, old trust. Ethan knew about it. The next morning, I called a locksmith and had every lock in the house replaced. While he worked, I checked my security cameras, the ones Thomas had installed before he passed. They were old, grainy, but they still worked. And there it was. The footage from 2 days earlier, Ethan crouched by the planter, glancing around, retrieving the spare key, and letting himself in. Melissa followed behind him carrying an empty tote bag. They stayed inside for 23 minutes. When they came out, the tote bag was full. My heart pounded. I checked my jewelry box, half my late husband's cufflinks were gone, along with the pearl necklace Thomas had given me on our 10th anniversary. I wasn't angry anymore. I was electric. Focused. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about respect, or rather, the complete lack of it. That afternoon, I called Ruth again. Elaine, she said, I can hear that tone. What happened now? They broke in, I said. And they stole from me again. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, all right. You want to press charges this time? No, I said slowly. I want to catch them doing it again. Properly. Her voice sharpened. You're setting a trap. Yes, I said. And this time, it's going to sting. 2 days later, I drove to the local police department with a small box in my hands, the same ceramic frog that used to hold my spare key. Inside the box, I placed a new key. But this one wasn't for my house. It was for a small shed I rented behind my friend Carol's property, a few streets away. Inside that shed, I set up an old safe, one that looked heavy and expensive but was really just a hollow prop. Ruth's husband, who did stage design for local theaters, helped me make it look authentic. We even filled it with fake jewelry and a stack of printed bond certificates that looked real enough to tempt anyone. Then I put a small GPS tracker inside the fake safe, taped under the lid. Finally, I called Ethan. Hi, sweetheart, I said, my tone warm. I wanted to tell you. I've been cleaning out the attic. Your father's old things. You might want to come by and see what you'd like to keep before I start donating. There was a pause. I could almost hear his brain working. Sure, Mom, he said. Maybe this weekend. Perfect, I said. The key still in the frog by the porch. Ruth raised an eyebrow when I told her what I'd done. You're bold, she said. You realize if he takes the bait, it could blow up fast? That's the point, I said. He's about to blow up his own reputation. The weekend came. I made sure to spend the day away from home, visiting Carol. I left my security cameras rolling. Around noon, Ethan's car pulled into my driveway. Melissa got out first, dressed in workout clothes like she was going to the gym. Ethan followed, glancing around before fishing the fake key from the frog. They entered the house. 20 minutes later, the footage showed them leaving, but this time, Ethan was carrying the fake safe, struggling under its weight. They loaded it into their trunk and drove off. I called Ruth. They took it. She laughed. Then it's time to see where it goes. The GPS pinged steadily as the tracker moved across town, to Ethan's house, then later to a pawn shop 2 neighborhoods away. That's where the twist began. When they tried to open the fake safe, they found not jewelry or bonds, but a stack of photographs. Photographs of them, clear, time-stamped security footage of their first break-in. And taped on top of the photos was a single note. Smile for the camera. The next copy goes to the police. I imagined Melissa's face when she read it, that perfect, smug expression crumbling as the truth sank in. But that wasn't even the best part. The pawnshop owner, seeing the safe and the strange photos inside, had already called the police. He thought he'd stumbled upon stolen property. By the time I got the call from Officer Reynolds, Ethan and Melissa were sitting in a holding room, trying to explain why they had a box full of evidence linking them to a burglary at my house. I didn't press charges, not right away. When I arrived at the station, Ethan's eyes were red, Melissa's mascara was streaked, and both looked like children caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Mom, please, Ethan said, his voice breaking. We didn't mean to. Oh, I think you did, I said quietly. Every step of it. Melissa jumped in. We thought it was just old stuff. Junk. You said he could take what he wanted. Not from a locked safe, I said. Not from a shed that doesn't even belong to me. The officer cleared his throat. Mrs. Morris, we can proceed with charges if you'd like. I looked at my son, my foolish, greedy boy who'd turned into a stranger. Not yet, I said. I think humiliation will do for now. When we left the station, Ethan tried to speak again, but I held up my hand. Don't call me, I said. Don't visit me. You want to rebuild what you broke? Start by learning what it means to work for something. He nodded, his face pale. Melissa stayed silent, clutching her purse like it was her last possession. I drove home and sat in the driveway for a long time, watching the sunset. The air smelled of cut grass and freedom. For the first time in years, I felt in control. But as I locked the door behind me that night, another thought crept in, one that made me pause. The GPS tracker app still showed movement. The fake safe wasn't at the police station anymore. Someone had taken it after the report. And it wasn't Ethan. When I called the officer to confirm, he said, "That's strange, Mrs. Morris. It was signed out earlier this afternoon by a woman claiming to be your attorney. A Ruth Jacobs." My stomach dropped. Ruth. The woman who had helped me plan everything. The woman who knew every detail of my accounts. The woman who now had the only key to the real safe in my house. I always believed betrayal was something you could sense. A tremor in the air. A shift in tone. But when it came for me the second time, I didn't feel it until it was already too late. The morning after I found out Ruth had taken the fake safe, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest that felt different from anger. This wasn't the sting of being fooled by my son again. This was something colder, the realization that someone I had truly trusted, someone who'd been in my home, who'd eaten at my table, might have just outplayed me at my own game. I tried to calm my thoughts. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the officer had gotten it wrong. Ruth was my friend of 15 years. She'd held my hand when Thomas passed away. She'd been the one who told me to keep your mind sharp and your money sharper. I dialed her number. Straight to voicemail. By noon, I was pacing the kitchen, watching the clock like a hawk. I called the police station again. The officer confirmed it. Yes, Mrs. Morris. Ruth Jacobs signed the release form herself. Had the proper ID and paperwork. Took the safe around 3:30 yesterday. My throat went dry. Did she say why? He paused. Said she was securing it as evidence on your behalf. That was when the last of my denial slipped away. Ruth had played me. I spent the rest of that day in a fog of disbelief. Every memory of Ruth replayed in my head like a movie, her easy laugh, her calm advice, the way she always insisted on handling my financial documents just to make things easier. I remembered how she'd offered to draft the power of attorney for me. How she'd smiled as I signed it. The realization hit me so hard I had to grip the counter to steady myself. She didn't just have access to my fake safe. She had access to everything. The next hour was chaos. I tore through my file cabinet, checking every folder. My legal documents were gone. The power of attorney paperwork, the one I'd signed just weeks earlier, had vanished. I called Mr. Klein at the bank immediately. Mr. Klein, I need you to freeze every account under my name right now. He hesitated. Mrs. Morris, your attorney, Ms. Jacobs, already came by this morning with authorization papers. She said you were incapacitated. We transferred oversight of your primary accounts to her temporary management. My stomach dropped. She what? It's temporary, he said quickly. Just a 30-day guardianship clause. She said you suffered a cognitive episode and asked us to act in your best interest until you're medically cleared. For a moment, I couldn't even form words. Cognitive episode. She'd told them I'd lost my mind. I hung up without saying goodbye and sank into a chair. My vision blurred. For the first time in my life, I felt small, like the walls were closing in around me. But then, through the fear, another feeling began to surface. Not despair. Not even anger. Clarity. I wasn't finished yet. That night, I went to the one person Ruth didn't know about, a man named Henry Cole. He was Thomas's old friend and a retired private investigator. The kind of man who still wore leather shoes, carried a notepad, and didn't trust anything that ran on Wi-Fi. He answered the door with the same dry grin I remembered from Thomas's poker nights. Elaine Morris, he said. I thought you disappeared after Thomas passed. I might have, I said, if I hadn't found myself surrounded by thieves. When I told him what happened, Henry listened quietly, only interrupting to jot down notes. When I finished, he nodded once. Classic grift. She built credibility, earned control, then used the power of attorney to drain your assets. Happens more than you'd think. I trusted her, I said. I gave her everything. And she knew it, Henry replied. But you're lucky you came to me now. If she hasn't moved the funds offshore yet, we can still trace her. He leaned forward, eyes sharp. You still have her personal number, right? Yes. Good. Don't call her. Just wait. Over the next week, Henry worked quietly behind the scenes. He contacted some old friends in financial forensics, people who still owed him favors from his PI days. Each day, he'd call me with updates that made my skin crawl. She's opened 2 new accounts, he told me on the second day. Both under shell companies. One's registered in her husband's name. The other under yours. Mine? He sighed. She's creating a trail to make it look like you approved the transfers. By the 3rd day, he confirmed what I feared most. Elaine, she's already liquidated part of your portfolio. About 40,000 so far. But she's being careful. Slow transfers. She knows if she moves too much at once, the bank will flag it. I sat at my kitchen table again, staring at the same spot where I'd plotted revenge against my son just weeks earlier. Only now, I was the one being outplayed. But I wasn't going to let this woman steal what Thomas and I had spent a lifetime building. On the 5th day, Henry called with something that changed everything. "Elaine, you said Ruth was your friend for 15 years, right?" "Yes." "Did you know she's been disbarred?" "What?" He sent me an article link. The headline hit me like a punch. "Local attorney suspended for mishandling client funds." It was dated 2 years ago. Somehow, she'd hidden it from me. She'd lied about her reinstatement, falsified her credentials, and used me as her next target. Henry's voice crackled through the line. "She's done this before. 3 times. Elder clients, small estates. She drains accounts, disappears, and leaves them to fight it out in court. I think she picked you because of the amount." I felt cold all over. "Can we stop her?" "Yes," he said. "But it won't be easy. We need her to incriminate herself, something on record." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Then I remembered something: the fake safe. The GPS tracker inside it. I grabbed my phone and opened the app. The tracker was still active, pinging from a small coastal town nearly 2 hours away. Ruth hadn't destroyed it. She'd taken it with her. A plan started forming. 2 mornings later, I drove to the address the tracker showed, a quiet rental cottage near the water. I parked down the street and waited. At noon, Ruth emerged, wearing sunglasses and a crisp linen jacket, holding what looked like my old safe. She placed it in the trunk of her car and got in. I followed from a distance. She drove into town, straight to a notary office. Henry had arranged to be nearby, pretending to read a newspaper. He gave me a subtle nod as she walked in. 10 minutes later, she came out holding a stack of papers and talking on her phone. I rolled down my window, just enough to hear her voice. "Yes," she said, smiling. "Everything's ready. I'll have the transfer finalized by Monday. The old woman doesn't even know what's happening." The words hit me like lightning. I stepped out of my car. "That old woman here's just fine." Ruth spun around. Her face went pale. "Elaine? What are you?" Henry walked up beside me, flipping open a small voice recorder. "Got every word," he said. Ruth's expression hardened. "You have no proof of anything illegal." "Actually," Henry said calmly, "we do. Fraudulent power of attorney, forged notary seal, and illegal transfer of funds from an incapacitated client." I looked her dead in the eye. "You picked the wrong widow." She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, 2 officers stepped out of a nearby car, Henry's friends from the department. They'd heard everything. Within minutes, Ruth was in handcuffs, still trying to talk her way out of it. As they led her to the cruiser, she turned back to me. "You think you've won, Elaine? This isn't over." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I know it isn't. I still have a son to deal with." That night, as I sat by the window watching the tide roll in, I finally felt something close to peace. Ruth's arrest had made local headlines by morning, and my accounts were already being restored. But I couldn't shake the thought that the universe was testing me, showing me what happens when trust is given too easily. Ethan still hadn't called. Not once since his humiliation at the police station. And somehow, I knew his silence meant trouble. When the phone finally rang 2 days later, I almost didn't answer. It was a voice I hadn't heard in months, shaky, desperate, familiar. "Mom," Ethan said. "We need to talk. It's about Melissa." I hadn't heard my son sound like that since the day Thomas died. His voice was trembling, thin, like it had been dragged through days of panic and nights without sleep. "Mom," Ethan said again, barely holding it together. "Please don't hang up. I know I don't deserve to ask, but I need your help." I sat down slowly, gripping the edge of the counter. "What happened?" He exhaled shakily. "It's Melissa. She's gone." "Gone?" "She left. Took everything. The car, the savings, even the dog." She's been having an affair for months. Some guy she met online. I only found out yesterday when the landlord called about the overdue rent. I closed my eyes. The irony was bitter. The woman who'd mocked me for being too trusting had conned my son the same way he'd conned me. I lost my job, Mom, he went on. She maxed out my credit cards, drained my account, and disappeared. I can't even pay for next month's rent. I don't know what to do. There was a long pause. I could hear him trying to breathe, trying to hold on to what little pride he had left. Ethan, I said softly. You remember what you told me the night you used my card? He didn't answer. You said it wasn't stealing because we were family. Mom, please, he whispered. I looked out the window, the evening light spilling across my kitchen floor. You were right about one thing, I said quietly. Family should help each other. But help isn't always about money. Sometimes it's about making sure you finally learn what it means to earn forgiveness. The silence stretched between us until he finally said, I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But please, just hear me out. Melissa told me something before she left. Something about you. My hand tightened around the phone. What did she say? She said Ruth was helping her, he said. That she and Ruth were planning something. I didn't believe it at first, but she showed me messages. My blood ran cold. Messages? Yeah. They were talking about transferring your money. Melissa said Ruth promised her a cut once the accounts cleared. Said it would look like you gave it willingly. So it hadn't just been Ruth. It had been Melissa too. All at once, the puzzle snapped together. Ruth hadn't found me by chance. Melissa had introduced her, years ago, after the wedding, when she said she'd met a wonderful lawyer who could help me manage my estate. I'd never thought twice about it. Mom, Ethan said quietly. I didn't know any of this until now. I swear. I wanted to believe him. God help me, part of me did. But trust wasn't something I had left to give freely. I'll think about what you said, I told him. Where are you staying? With a friend, he muttered. Just until I figure things out. All right, I said. Stay there. Don't do anything stupid. I'll call you tomorrow. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The clock ticked. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. I could still hear the tremor in my son's voice, not just from shame, but from loss. Melissa had stripped him bare. Maybe that was justice. Or maybe it was the final punishment life had saved for me. The next day, I went to see Henry. He was already up to speed. Your daughter-in-law was working with Ruth, he said, tapping a file on his desk. We found wire transfers between them dating back months. Small amounts at first. Consulting fees. Then larger sums once Ruth got access to your accounts. So she was in on it from the start. He nodded. Looks that way. She probably thought she'd get a piece of your estate once Ruth finished laundering it. But when Ruth got greedy, she cut Melissa out. Classic double-cross. I sat back, stunned. That woman used my son to get to me. And she used your trust to make it possible, Henry said. They all did. He hesitated, then added quietly, You want to press charges against Melissa too? I thought about it. The humiliation. The shopping spree. The months of lies. Then I thought about Ethan, alone, broke, abandoned, finally seeing what betrayal felt like. No, I said. Not yet. That evening, I called Ethan again. He sounded surprised to hear from me. Mom? Pack your things, I said. I'm picking you up in an hour. He didn't ask why. Maybe he didn't dare. When I pulled up outside the small apartment where he was staying, he looked thinner, older, defeated. He climbed into the car silently. We drove for a while without speaking. Then I said, You still remember how to work with your hands? He looked at me, puzzled. What? Your father taught you carpentry, didn't he? He nodded slowly. Yeah, but I haven't touched a tool in years. Well, you're about to start again. He frowned. Doing what? I pulled into the driveway of my old rental property, a place Thomas and I had bought decades ago but left empty after he died. The lawn was overgrown, the paint chipped, the porch sagging. I need it renovated, I said. You want forgiveness? Earn it. Fix this place from the ground up. No handouts. No shortcuts. I'll pay you a fair wage, but every dollar goes toward repaying what you stole. He stared at the house, then at me. You're serious? Dead serious. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right. I'll do it. The first few days were quiet. He worked from sunrise to sunset, sanding, painting, hammering in the summer heat. I brought him water and sandwiches, never offering more than polite small talk. One afternoon, as I watched him from the porch, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: focus. Determination. Sweat running down his face, hands calloused and dirty. He caught me watching and smiled weakly. You know, Dad used to make me redo every crooked nail. I smiled back. He had high standards. For the first time in a long time, the silence between us wasn't cold. It was healing. Weeks passed. The house began to take shape. And slowly, so did we. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Ethan sat beside me on the porch steps. He handed me a small velvet pouch. What's this? I asked. He swallowed hard. The pearls. I found them at a pawn shop last week. Melissa sold them for almost nothing. I bought them back. I opened the pouch and felt tears sting my eyes. My pearl necklace, the one Thomas had given me on our 10th anniversary, gleamed softly in the fading light. I don't expect you to forgive me, Ethan said quietly. But I'm done being that person. I want to make things right. For the first time since this all began, I reached out and held his hand. Maybe people didn't change overnight. But sometimes, they could start over. That night, as I locked the house, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It was a single photo: Ruth, sitting in a courtroom, handcuffed, glaring at the camera. And beneath it, a short text. You think you've won. But I'm not the only one who knows your secrets. My heart stopped. I looked at the number. It wasn't hers. It was Melissa's. The message from Melissa hit me like ice water. I stared at it for a long time, my pulse pounding. You think you've won. But I'm not the only one who knows your secrets. I didn't have any secrets, or at least, that's what I told myself. But the truth was, I'd done something I hadn't told anyone, not even Henry. When I transferred my savings into new accounts, I'd moved one small fortune, a secret account Thomas had opened years ago, into Melissa's name. It wasn't trust. It was bait. I'd created the account right after Ruth's arrest, knowing Melissa couldn't resist trying to dig up one last score. And just as I expected, she'd taken the bait. That night, Henry called. Elaine, the FBI just contacted me. Someone tried to move $50,000 from an account registered under your daughter-in-law's name. Guess who? Melissa, I said quietly. He chuckled. She used her own IP address. Left a digital trail a mile long. By morning, she was in custody for financial fraud and attempted identity theft. When Ethan and I heard the news, he didn't gloat. He just sat quietly, staring at the floor. I guess karma came faster than I thought, he said. I nodded. Sometimes, it just needs a little help finding the right address. A month later, the renovated house was finished. Ethan moved in, not as a tenant, not as a debtor, but as my son again. He paid me back every dollar he could. I let him keep the rest. On the last night of summer, we stood on the porch together watching the sunset. Do you ever regret it? He asked softly. The revenge? I thought about it, about the lies, the traps, the games. Then I smiled faintly. No. It's what saved us. He nodded, understanding more than I expected. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of fresh paint and cut grass. For the first time in years, the world felt quiet. And somewhere out there, behind prison walls and frozen bank accounts, both Ruth and Melissa finally knew what it felt like to underestimate a woman who'd lost everything, except her will to fight back. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.